All right, everyone. Welcome to July's Shop Talk. Hope everyone is doing well. Dave, how are you?
I am great. I just got back from being out of the country for 2 weeks, so got a lot of catching up to do, but I'm excited and looking forward to getting caught up.
Well, fantastic. Well, again, today is Tuesday, July 12th. This is our Shop Talk meeting for the month of July. There will not be one in September, or excuse me, in August. Our next one will be in September. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but obviously second week of August, everybody's going to be busy with turns. So we're not going to, we're going to take August off because I know everybody is going to be busy. Really quick, while I've got you here, Dave, I want to go through, or before I bring you on, Dave, I want to go through really quick and make sure everybody is aware of how to use this platform that we're using, Webinar Jam. Just really quick, over in the right-hand column, you'll see an area there where you can chat. You can chat privately with individuals and myself. You can also do a group chat to everybody. You can also do a Q&A. If you've got a particular question for any of our panelists today, just click on that Q&A part of the box, and then again, you can also choose who can see that question. We also want to make sure that we don't just have to put everything in writing with our questions. If you've got something you would like to discuss with one of the panelists, there's also that request to speak button at the top of that column as well. And you can click on that. You'll go through just a quick kind of checklist of audio and everything to make sure that works. And then we will bring you onto the live stage. Also be aware that the live stage is running about 10 to 20 seconds ahead of when everybody in the audience is hearing it. So you may see some things come up in the chat box because it is live before you're actually hearing something about it. So just be aware of that. Well, Dave, a lot of stuff's been going on in DC, and I know you've got some updates for us. We'll start with you, and if you can give us just a little bit of insight as to what's going on. But actually, before I get started on that, I wanted to talk really quick about the conference, because in June's meeting, June's Shop Talk, we actually, you guys had just launched the registration for this year's NMHC Student Housing Conference. So if we could kind of start there and tell us how that planning process is going and what we should look forward to in Miami.
Absolutely. Again, Wes, always appreciate that we have the opportunity to participate in this monthly call. We think it's obviously very important. And you're right. We started the registration last month for our upcoming student housing conference. It's going to take place in South Beach. So those of you who like South Beach, you should definitely come down. It's a good time of the year. Hopefully we're praying that there's no hurricanes that come through. Looking forward to next year. If you like Vegas, that's where we're heading as well. So got a couple great conference locations coming up, both this year and next year. Hopefully we'll see everybody down in Miami Beach at the Lowe's. So we're looking forward to that. So with that in mind, as you mentioned, there's a lot of stuff going on here in Washington. We always try and keep this short because I'm not sure that people want to pay too much attention, but we always try and focus on things that may be impacting the student housing industry, the things that may be of interest to you all. So one of the things my colleague, Matthew Berger, who he and I run our student housing, but we also wear two other hats. I do capital markets for NMHC, and Matthew does tax. So the first thing I'm going to mention quickly is that there is a potential change to a tax provision that we are monitoring that may get passed. There's something called reconciliation, and just a quick update on how Washington works. Reconciliation can get passed by a simple majority, which is actually a pretty important thing. And if you look at it, the Democrats have both majorities in both the House and Senate at the moment. So this could possibly happen, would change a current excess tax that was used to pay for the Affordable Care Act that may be extended to from only including passive income to active income. So obviously an impact on this industry as well for those of people who are investors in this industry. Having said what I said about the Democrats currently having the majority, you know, there's a lot of focus right now in Congress on private equity. And with when I mentioned private equity, if you think about the acquisition of ACC coming up, that clearly is from a private equity firm. Congress is exceedingly focused on impact to the rental housing market, the single family rental housing market, et cetera. And so they have been hearing, there have been a lot of hearings on the Hill. Actually, in fact, one took place today where they're focusing on private equity and its impact on that. Similarly, there's concern about inflation, and are there causes that are controllable, or are there companies that are price gouging? So again, Congress is focusing on some of these things as ways of managing inflation. So some of those things are clearly near and dear to our own hearts, both individually as well as our companies. We face a lot of inflationary pressures, but there's a lot of other issues going on that Congress is certainly putting a big eye on that. Whether they can get legislation passed or not goes to the next thing I have on here, which is the window to get anything passed is closing quickly, if not already closed. Think about midterm elections come up in November. You know, if you read the news, there's a high likelihood that the Democrats will lose a majority at minimum in the House, and there's certainly a pretty big wave that people are considering that the Republicans will take in the House. The Senate is clearly a lot less muddied, and to the degree that it stays Democratic majority, and there are certain circumstances which it could, if you look at some of the prognosticators, that will make things even more difficult to legislate over the next 2 years. So what does that mean? Well, regulatory, you know, you don't need anybody to pass anything other than to propose rules. We've covered some of the things in the past that have already occurred, such as the SEC wanting to do climate change disclosure for public companies, which may have some trickle-down effect on private companies as well, which again are things that would certainly impact the student housing industry as well. We're working on quite a number of other regulatory changes right now, and I would expect that would be the major focus for any agency that has control over climate, finance, treasury, disclosure, reporting, anything of that nature. So we fully expected this year, and to the degree that the shifts occur, especially if it's split between the House and the Senate, that we will continue to see a lot of regulatory changes and proposals coming up over the next couple of years. So one of the things that I wanted to point out as well, as service kind of to the industry in terms of what NMHC does, we have a number of things that we have published and are publishing. And among the things is a cost of regulation survey. We did this back in 2018. It was pretty groundbreaking and got a lot of good airplay on both from regulators on the Hill as well as those at the state level. We updated that. We do that survey along with the National Association of Home Builders. That was just published a couple weeks ago, and the cost of regulation survey results are the cost to build a property is regulation makes up over 40% of that cost. So clearly very instrumental in terms of kind of focusing the eyes of those administration, those who are passing legislation, that the regulation environment is going to be constraining for the ability of all of us to build more housing. So additionally, if you're a member of NMHC, we also do a Women in Multifamily series as part of our Emerging Leaders program. We're actually going to do one of those at our student housing conference. One of the featured speakers is going to be Donna Price, so good shout out for Donna to do that as well. But that's something that it's a continuing series, and we highlight people. So if you've got anybody who you think would be a good person to highlight within this space, please pass that along to us. It's something that we are doing as continuing webinars. And we have a bunch of white papers that we've done in the past that we're updating. Cybersecurity, clearly a big issue for everybody, especially with the kind of war going on between Ukraine and Russia. That certainly amplified cybersecurity risk, privacy issues, music licensing, and rental reporting. These are all white papers that we've done before, and we use these a lot when we are talking with those, again, who are regulators and people who are policymakers, both at a federal and a state level as well. So that kind of just gives you some of the things that we provide to our members that they can use individually to the degree that they want to for their own businesses or in their discussions with local policymakers as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Wes. And again, NMHC appreciates the ability to continue to participate in Shop Talk, and thanks.
Absolutely. And if you've got any questions for Dave, I've got a couple of other slides and announcements I'm going to make here. So if you've got anything for Dave, go ahead and put that in the Q&A, and I will ask that before we let him go. I also put up a poll a little bit ago regarding, or basically just asking everybody, hey, are you planning on going to Miami for the NMHC Student Housing Conference in September? Right now, and if you haven't voted, go do that. Right now, we're at 33% yes, 22% I'm considering it, and 44% not this year. So got a couple more seconds here to vote on that before I publish that. Charlie, welcome to Shop Talk.
What's going on, my friends? Dave, I'm excited to see you in South Beach, my friend.
Yeah, man. So just so you guys know, you like to hear Charlie give that information. He's actually one of our confirmed panelists. So come down and hear Charlie and see him in person in South Beach. So looking forward to seeing you.
I'm excited too, Dave. Appreciate the opportunity, my friend. Let's see.
Well, hey, I wanted to really quick while I've got the two of you here, because I know over the past year you guys have been instrumental in being kind of a regular ongoing element to what's now called Shop Talk, but this monthly student housing call that was started back at the beginning of COVID. When we launched everything, we said we've got to nominate a new leadership committee. The folks that have been doing it were a bit, let's just say, they've been working on it for 2 years, and they were a little tired of having to do it, and said, look, there's got to be some more leadership to stand up. So starting in August, here are our new leadership committee members. We've got Adam Byerly with the Price Company, Caitlin Hanks with Campus Advantage, Casey Peterson from Peak Made Real Estate, Jennifer Frazier from Graystar, Julie Bonin from Asset Living, and Sly Brandon from Cardinal Group. So big thanks to those folks for raising their hand to volunteer for the leadership for this. And if you've got any type of items that you're wanting us to discuss on Shop Talk, certainly send them to me at wes@studenthousinginsight.com, but also you can send it to these folks as well. And their information and email is on our website at shoptalk.info. And I just want to make give a big thanks to these folks who are on our current leadership board: Christine Richards, Miles Orth, Dan Oldersdorf, and Jennifer Cassidy. They have been huge over the past 2 years with, getting this thing up and going and keeping it going and making sure that we're getting good information, actionable information out to everyone. And just want to say a big thanks to them. So, Dave, I don't see anything in the Q&A for you. So right. With that being said, we'll go on over to Charlie and get started with talking about what everybody's doing from a leasing standpoint.
Good deal. Awesome.
All right. Let me bring your slide up here just a second.
Beautiful. Don't you love my internet connection?
It's so much better, Charlie. Everybody thanks you for the better internet connection. That's for sure.
I'm here to serve. I am here to serve. So let's hop into things. So this is our July 11th national occupancy report, or national report for the student housing industry. This covers essentially the last few days in June and the first 10 days in July. So should be pretty up to date with what's going on in the world of student housing. So jumping over to that occupancy slide, if you can help me out, Wes. All righty. So right now, national occupancy, roughly about 90.34%. That's about 4.37% above the occupancy this time last year. The pre-lease is right under 86% at 85.93. That's roughly about 7.22% above where we were this time last year as well. I know everybody kind of asks and is kind of thinking, where are we going to end up this coming year, or once move-ins occur? You can see the delta there is roughly about 3%, the difference between the occupancy difference and the pre-lease. So the numbers say that the industry will end up somewhere in that 92, 93 range if the trend line continues. I know this time last year there was some continued late leasing occurring over the summer. I know COVID contingencies and things changing. So just something to keep an eye on as we get closer to that beautiful move-in date and all your new residents. So looking at the Northeast, occupancy right around 90% at 90.02, pre-lease at roughly 84.92, occupancy up about 4.5%, whereas at 85.37%. And then pre-lease this time last year was roughly 76.42%. In the Midwest region, occupancy right around 90.45%, pre-lease at roughly 85.63%. Occupancy this time last year was 86.79. So again, about 3.5% change there as well. And in pre-lease this time last year was 78.14%. In the Southeast, occupancy sits at 91.12%, and pre-lease at roughly 86.54%. Occupancy this time last year in the Southeast, which again, I think I've mentioned this multiple times, is the largest, I guess, from a concentration of bed standpoint, largest region that we cover. The occupancy this time last year, 87.46, and then pre-lease this time last year was roughly 80.14%. In the Southwest region, 90.71% current occupancy, pre-lease roughly 87.34%. Occupancy this time last year, so 86.26%, and then pre-lease this time last year at 80.22%. And then the Western region, and normally a little later on the leasing scale, occupancy 91.16, and pre-lease at 82.12. Occupancy up roughly 85.23%, and pre-lease roughly 73.34%. A lot of that in thanks to the California state schools opening back up their campuses from COVID the prior year. So good news, especially for those on the West Coast. I mean, markets like Davis, California, that I know a lot of people have their eyes on, firing back. A lot of properties in those regions are doing, or in those states are doing exceptionally well.
Yeah, this looks great across the country. And every time I open up LinkedIn or Facebook page for one of these properties, they're showing their big gold balloons of reaching 100%, and excited to see that. I don't know if you've looked at it yet, but tier 1 versus tier 2, are you seeing any difference there?
The one thing, so we actually looked at from a rates perspective. And I know a lot of times we don't necessarily talk too much about the rates on these. On our year-end reports, we look at that. But one thing to note as you look at rate increases, your tier 1 schools, a lot of your larger markets, I think about a month ago, the average rate increase was somewhere around 5.5%. When you look out at some of your tier 3 markets that, again, I wouldn't say take it on the chin, but had harder implications from COVID, are jumping back a lot faster from a growth perspective, right? So 7.5% in some of your tier 2, tier 3 markets, where I know a lot of eyes may not be, given the fact of kind of the changing macro levels with inflation and rates and et cetera. Trying to get debt in some of these tertiary markets may be a little harder, but performance is pretty astounding when you look at it side by side, tier 1 versus tier 2 and tier 3. I'd say what's interesting from my point of view is specifically those markets with a high international student population. What we're talking about today, Columbus, Ohio. You're also talking Champaign, Illinois. I mean, those markets have jumped back in a huge way. I think Champaign's up like 13-14% as a market. So it's nice to see things, the little pieces, right? Whether it's international students, visa programs, or just students coming back to campus. We joke about, I wouldn't say joke about, but we toss around the word resiliency as a fancy buzzword in the space. But, I think, just based on the people that are reaching out to us on the data side, so many more institutional groups, so many more groups that are, I guess either reinvigorated in the space or wondering what's going on in the student housing world. And that's, again, based on that performance. So it's not just the data. It's not just what people are posting on LinkedIn. It's also what the money's saying. And that's, you got to follow what they're thinking. And again, makes my life a lot easier.
Yeah. Looking forward to talking about Columbus here in just a minute. In fact, if you're on our deep dive panel, I think I see 3 of our panelists and they've requested to speak. I think the only one I'm missing is Nate Rivard. So Nate, if you're hearing this, if you could go ahead and request to speak, and I'll start bringing those folks in. So catch us up on these select markets.
Yes. So looking at the select markets here, these are the similar ones that we used last ShopTalk. So you can kind of get some insight on what's going on. Ithaca, New York, Cornell, current occupancy 94.91, current pre-lease roughly 87.91. Current occupancy this time last year relatively the same, or is it 95.20? The pre-lease was down about almost 12 points. I think there were some lingering COVID concerns there in the Ithaca market, New York in general. So they ended up jumping, some late leasing into August, got up to that 93, 94 number upon move-in. State College, Pennsylvania, current occupancy roughly 93.39%, current pre-lease roughly 93.72%. So you see a difference there in the occupancy and the pre-lease. So good signs in State College. Occupancy year over year is up about 7 points. And then pre-lease is up about 3.5% there in State College, Pennsylvania. In Bloomington, Indiana, current occupancy roughly 92.11. Current pre-lease roughly 88.46%. In this time last year, occupancy was roughly 91.31. But this time last year, the pre-lease in Bloomington, very few beds left, was 98.37%. So, seemingly, get a month and a half left of leasing to see how things shake up in Bloomington. A lot of eyes are on that from a development standpoint. Lincoln, Nebraska, current occupancy 91.40, current pre-lease roughly 80.18%. Current occupancy this time last year 93.46, and then pre-lease was about 4.5 points ahead where it was this time last year at 84.71%. Tallahassee, Florida State. Current occupancy roughly 91.48%. Current pre-lease roughly 89.89%. Occupancy up about 5 points there, where it was at 86.52. And pre-lease pretty much on par with where it was this time last year at 89.61%. Tuscaloosa, Alabama, University of Alabama, current occupancy 81.32%. Current pre-lease roughly 79.61%. The occupancy this time last year was 71.46%, and the pre-lease this time last year roughly 75.40%. So up about 4 points there in Tuscaloosa and trending the right way. Huntsville, Texas, current occupancy roughly 77.44%. Current pre-lease roughly 73.28. This time last year the occupancy was 74.10. And this time last year, the pre-lease was 70.31%. So about 3 points there in Huntsville, Texas. In San Antonio, Texas, current occupancy 93.47. Current pre-lease 87.30%. Occupancy this time last year is roughly 87.49. And then pre-lease was about 4 points, 4 points behind where it is today at 83.88%. Eugene, Oregon, which I know we touched on last week. Or last ShopTalk, current occupancy roughly 90.41%, current pre-lease at a little over 83% at 83.09. And then the occupancy this time last year roughly 90.07, and pre-lease this time last year slightly ahead, about 1.2%, where it was at 84.29. I know there's a couple new devs in that market as we discussed last Shop Talk, but got a little longer on the leasing cycle there in Eugene. And then Seattle, Washington, current occupancy 91.91% and current pre-lease 74.43%. Occupancy, another market that had some COVID implications. Occupancy this time last year was 77.22%, where pre-lease is roughly 77.69%. So those are your select markets across the U.S. Any questions or anything like that, feel free to shoot me a note. I'm happy to help you out or answer any questions you may have. But I think we're excited to talk Columbus, Ohio. Wes, I know I'll turn it back over to you for the moment, so you can introduce the group, or should I start running through kind of the high level?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, go ahead and give us kind of a roundup. And again, I apologize. The pipeline, although it may actually be right, but yeah. You sent me an updated slide for this that was more around 2,300 beds. Correct. And I'll have that updated before we put it on the website. But yeah, if you could kind of run through this, that'd be great. Definitely.
Going to Ohio State University, one of the largest in the country, current occupancy roughly 94%, which is up about 4.98. So roughly it was around 89% this time last year. The current pre-lease is right around 90%, which is about 6.02% ahead of where it was this time last year. And then the average rate per bed, again, this is point in time information. The average rate is $1,060, which is up roughly about 10% year over year. When you look at the floor plan, so of the stabilized inventory, roughly about 6,000 beds or so, 5,500 in that range. The current occupancy at the studios is roughly 95.75%, and the pre-lease is roughly 96.81%. For the one bedrooms, occupancy is roughly 97.68%, where pre-lease is 86.91%. For the two bedrooms, the occupancy is roughly 94.94%, and the pre-lease is roughly 90.36%. The occupancy for the three-bedroom floor plans is 91.71%. For the pre-lease is roughly 93.21%. For the four bedrooms, which is the largest number of beds in this data set here, the occupancy roughly 80.24% and pre-lease roughly 66.85%. And then for the 5+, so 5s and 6s, I think there's one property with 1.7. The occupancy roughly 100%, not roughly, it is 100%, and pre-lease at 100%. As Wes alluded to, I sent him an update, had a little bit of a typo in there from a previous slide we put together, but pipeline's roughly 5 projects, 2,302 beds, and that's kind of the breakdown from a data perspective in Columbus. So I'm now going to turn it over to Wes to introduce our lovely panelists today to talk about what's going on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to talk about the Ohio State University. So let's switch out our presentation slides here for just a second. Here we go. And I'm still waiting on Nate Rivard. He's our final panelist here with Edwards. He keeps having some issues each time I accept him. So we'll go ahead and get started and try to get him on here as soon as we can. But anyway, yeah, so we've got a fantastic panel. So folks that have been in Columbus a long time and looking forward to hearing from them. And this is one of those markets where, we've got a lot of non-purpose-built student housing that students are living in. And I'm excited to have a couple of folks that have got experience with that, because I think that's something that, even though we're seeing more and more purpose-built student housing in Columbus, there's always going to be that element of, what we typically call the shadow market. So excited to talk to these folks about that. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over. Lance, let's start with you. And if you guys can introduce yourself, and we'll get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Wes, for putting this on and having us. Thanks, Charlie, for giving us the market background and all that data that you guys put together. I know everyone appreciates College House, and we use it quite often. But I'm Lance Perlman. I'm Director of Leasing with CA Student Living. Been with CA for just over 6 years and been in the industry just over 11. We currently manage 3 assets in the Columbus market, which is 289 units and 753 beds.
Great. Devin?
Well, hey guys, I'll echo what Lance said. Super excited to be here today. My name is Devin Shalley-Brumbaugh. I am the Director of Leasing for the Tailwind Group. I'm actually based in Columbus as well, so this is my hometown heart market. Been with Tailwind since 2019 and have been in student housing for about 8 years now. We have 1 asset in the Columbus market. It's the Griff. It's 586 beds, and we've retained that since 2018.
Great. Todd, we'll go on to you.
All right. Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Todd Dillon. I'm the president of Home Team Properties. Home Team Properties has been a staple of the Ohio State University since about 1985. We are one of the largest landlords in the shadow market. We've also come out of the shadow, and we have we own and manage some purpose-built student housing stuff as well. In total, we have about 1,500 units and 4,000 beds on campus.
Great. And we're still working on getting Nate Rivard in. Nate Rivard is the president of Edwards Student Housing. A lot of you guys may, if you've been in student housing for a while, you may have remember Nate and Edwards. They had a brand that they called the Province, which was pretty popular throughout the Southeast. So hopefully he's at a site down in Florida. So hopefully he'll be able to get this worked out. I just told him to restart, and maybe we can bring him in. But he also represents 528 units and 1,350 beds. So hopefully we can get him on here pretty soon. So I wanted to go ahead and let's take a look at enrollment, because I've been really impressed with Ohio State and what they've been able to do as it relates to enrollment, because they had a huge impact on international students, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But as you could tell here with the 3-year trend, 2020, it was very minimal, the loss of students going into the fall of 2020 and how everyone was dealing with the pandemic. And then in 2021 actually had a 0.5% increase. So I've been very impressed with, what they've been able to pull off from that standpoint. Let's talk a little bit about the impact with international students. As you can see here, they lost 997 total, both undergrad and graduate. That has not really picked up. They netted another 17. And so we're still about 1,000 students short from as far as international students compared to 2019. And so where did that, obviously those folks or the additional students came domestically. So I wanted to take a look at how, that actually panned out. 824 came from the state of Ohio. And then I've got this broken down to the other regions here, 386 from the Northeast, and also a gain of 94 from the Southeast. I was actually really surprised that Alabama was probably the biggest contributor from the Southeast to students going to Ohio State. So I don't know what that says about Roll Tide and War Eagle, but that was interesting. So, my first question for the panel, losing that many international students and then, obviously getting an influx of students from Ohio, did that have any kind of impact on your leasing and marketing? Because, I didn't get into the counties to see, how many of them were in driving distance and decided to commute. So I'll put that out to Devin first, if you can give some insight on what you experienced.
Yeah. I think that does play a big part in it. Obviously during COVID, they accepted more Ohio-based students. And I think a lot of those individuals were in driving distance because there is a really strong suburb population to the north and east of Columbus. They're very densely populated with really strong school systems that match the incoming requirements for Ohio State that they're looking for. So I think if you were to drill it down to counties, you would see that a lot of those students were in those north and east suburbs, and they were within driving distance. So during that time of COVID, as they were admitting more domestic students, they were within driving distance. And now as we're kind of turning a corner on that chapter, we've seen a lot of those students move out from home, from the Dublin suburb, New Albany, Hilliard, et cetera, and start to live closer to campus. And I think that's played a direct impact in us seeing larger numbers and a higher pre-lease this year.
Todd?
Yeah. Well, as everyone knows in this market, COVID really made us change how we operate our businesses in general. And for us, majority of our holdings are in the shadow markets. And so we really had to make a decision, and we made a decision to really invest in technology, to invest in 3D tours and to make our product more visible that helped our company. On the purpose-built side of things, we absolutely were affected by the international market. One of our buildings, the Wilson Place at Landon High, arguably one of the best intersections of all of college campuses. We had a large contingent of international students pre-leased pre-COVID, and none of them came back, and so we had a hard push to fill that building back up, and our team did a tremendous job of doing that. And it was through the changes of the university COVID protocol that maybe some kids were coming out of the dorms, or they were letting in more, as Devin alluded to, more local students into the market, and so we were successful. And luckily, luckily through hard work, didn't have any occupancy issues because of that, but it was definitely a learning lesson. Gotcha.
Lance, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll kind of echo that. Just a couple things with enrollment. Typically, in-state tuition is going to be, half, probably about a third of what, out-of-state tuition is going to be. And I think that kind of plays a part into, what we see here with more, Ohio-based students going to the Ohio State University. And then secondly, as far as international students, we, same as what Todd said, we really felt that with the asset that we have further south down High Street. I know we're going to kind of move on to our next question and get more into that. But, that really hit home with us. And, typically the international students with what's left to lease is going to be, either further south, or it's going to be further away from campus, similar to, the Griff, which I know Devin oversees. So that hurt us a lot.
Gotcha. So are you guys, we looked at Charlie's slide earlier, and obviously, the properties seem to be tracking ahead of last year. So, velocity has been kicked up. Do you think that, or are you hearing anything from the university about enrollment increasing, or even just what the projections are for this coming fall? And you think that's playing in at all with the increased velocity you guys have had this year?
I haven't heard anything specifically from the university other than what they've published online, or, what we see in College House that Charlie picks up. But historically, we see traffic, like I said, move north to south, starting at, High and Lane in that area with where the dorms are. And typically traffic starts to move south historically. This past year, or I should say this current leasing season, we saw traffic do something a little different. It kind of just went outwards from that point instead of just making its way south, which I think benefited everybody in the market. Our assets there filled, quicker than we've ever seen them. Some upwards of 20% ahead year over year, and reaching 100% in a market that typically, we wouldn't fill those assets until around this time. So to see that happen, obviously helps with us pushing rates, and capitalizing on, what we are able to achieve this year. And hopefully we see something next year. And then in regards to, just some university items, I think across, all universities, they made their acceptance a little bit easier on students since COVID, which I think kind of plays a role into why we're seeing more kids in the market. Instead of going into, a feeder school like a community college, they now have access and an easier way to get into, a state school or local university.
Gotcha. And I'm still texting with Nate. We're just not having any luck with getting his computer to let him in. But he did say pre-leasing has started earlier each year. What we have seen, he said, safety concerns the past 2 years has pushed parents to locate purpose-built controlled access, new builds. Virtual tours were a large part of our COVID leasing. International 2019-20 have been strong. Last fall leasing was flipped to less international. So, Nate, hopefully we can get you in before we're over here, but I think at this point we just we'll move forward. One thing I wanted to mention, I invited some folks from Ohio State from Res Life and facilities to be able to join, and a few of them were at the conference in DC today. So, but one thing I wanted to make sure that everybody is aware of is that they are working on a new master plan, and that is supposed to be out in early 2023. So be on the lookout for that for sure. Todd, I want to talk to you a little bit about the PBSH assets versus the non-PBSH assets. The non-PBSH, or the shadow market there, is way bigger than what I'm representing here. We just looked at the central campus market, and I'll show a map here in a second to kind of show what what part of campus that we're talking about. But in particular there's about 3,800 beds spread over 1,100 units. All of those seem to be 100% pre-leased for this coming year, although, as we all know, a lot of that is joint and several, so that we don't really know for sure if every room is filled, but for the most part, everybody's unit or house is certainly leased for the next year. Tell me a little bit about what you've seen, because you guys manage both PBSH and non-PBSH. What's been leasing up quicker this year versus previously? Are you seeing any differences with that? Just want to get your insight on that.
Yeah, for sure. As Lance said, we've been in the purpose-built student housing market at Ohio State on High Street. I think we were the first on High Street with the view on High, which now Lance and CA have under their control. But that was in 2016. That market had typically not gone out of the gates quickly. It took time to season, and typically we're in March or April before we're 100% leased in those, always achieving that 100% leased. This year it was gangbusters right out of the gate. It seemed like a lot of the Greek life had honed in on our purpose-built assets, and they really pushed for that occupancy fill up, in October, from a pre-lease standpoint. Our shadow market stuff, especially in Central Campus and especially the single family houses, since 1985, it's just, they fill up at will. There's waiting lists, there's pass downs, and so it really hasn't been that much different. I'd say the difference that we're seeing this year over others is the strength of maybe our more affordable studio units on campus. I would say at this point last year we had, of 150 studio units, we had still 60-ish available, which we ended up filling up to 100%. But at this point this year we have 0. They're all full. So I think that's sentiment of, there's people are expecting to return to campus. There's not going to be online classes next year. They're not going to commute from a half hour or 45 or an hour away to save that rent, and so I think that speaks to that. So we're also anxious for, we love President Johnson. We love what she says. She has some bold statements of growing the house state and the student population, and so I think the developers are doing our job. We're building the assets so they can build the student portfolio.
Gotcha. I'm going to go ahead and skip really quick to talk about rental rates. And then I've got to get Kevin from Ryan on to talk about property taxes in the state of Ohio. So I want to make sure we've got time to do that. But let's talk about rental rates really quick and the increase that we've seen. College House is reporting about a 10.3% year-over-year increase on rents. Looking, at some other numbers that you guys provided, looks like it's probably somewhere between 6 and 10%. I just want to talk with you guys because we've ran into the same issue at a lot of other universities that we've done deep dives on. It seems like everybody had a really hard time keeping up with with pushing the rental rates because it was leasing so fast. And it seems like, that's kind of been the situation here in Columbus as well. When you guys started out the leasing season, were you guys on track to hit these kind of or did you project these kind of increases, or is this just been a pleasant surprise?
I mean, I think for us, it was a pleasant surprise. I think there's a lot of factors that go into setting rates. And I don't think, based on prior year and seeing, especially with our assets that were further south, how long they took to lease and how far behind they were, that played a factor in, kind of how we set our rates for going into this leasing season. I don't think anyone anticipated how quickly markets would stabilize and kids would start signing so much earlier. And it is tough to keep up with, those rate increases, and, kids are just boom, boom, boom in the door signing. So it's been a pleasant surprise. And, I think everyone on our asset management team wishes we had a crystal ball and could, give that projection of, we're going to hit, 1,060 a bed. But unfortunately, there's so many factors that play into that.
Yeah, I will kind of follow along with what Lance said. Our property hit 100% last year. So we felt very comfortable, as a baseline, raising every floor plan, a minimum $25. And, to see the response of students still just, without hesitation sign for that, you're like, okay, this is the baseline and we can really grow from there. And, I know that in our prep call, we had talked a little bit about rental rate increases, purpose-built versus non-purpose-built. And, I think it is a little bit easier for us because there is a clear valuation of your product against, what Lance has and this and that. And what I also think is really unique about this market is the student tends to make the decision very early on in their academic career, usually by the end of their freshman year, of, am I going to go with the stuff that's non-purpose built east of High, or am I going to go with the purpose built stuff west of High? And that would be, the properties that CA has, what we have, et cetera. And then, that plays very, very heavily into your rental rate increases because, you're seeing those students stick with that same type of product. And if they are moving out of your property, they're probably going from the Griff to Uncommon or vice versa. We've seen a lot of that transaction. So yeah, I would say, with us hitting 100%, we had a very clear baseline of where we were going to increase. And then to still see the response to that be so strong, it's a good feeling. And I think from there, the rental rate increases are pretty clear for us just because, we see our product up against, those other purpose-built assets in the market. And I think the students make that decision very early on of what type of housing. And some of that is based on if they are Greek affiliated or an athlete or whatever the case is, and they tend to stick with that asset type through their journey at Ohio State. And it's a matter of, in order to retain them, how you can stay competitive within kind of the two sub-markets of purpose-built, non-purpose-built that's very clearly divided by High Street. That non-purpose-built tends to be east and the purpose-built tends to be on High and west of that.
Gotcha. Todd, anything to add to that?
The only thing is I think, Columbus in general is growing, and, we are an urban campus, which gives us.
I think we lost your audio there.
The force of rents, even in the higher end neighborhoods surrounding Ohio State, are getting higher. So now some of these people maybe not be students coming into those shadow market areas and running from us, which creates more demand in the student population. So Columbus is a great place to be right now.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about pipeline. We've got 3 properties that are coming online in 2023. Charlie, I'm going to ask you to kind of jump in here and go through some of these and what you know. But first one up is Lumen by Parallel Company at 76 East 9th. It's going to bring 143 units, 351 beds, 134 parking spaces, studios to 4s. Anything else you're hearing about this project?
No, I think it's on time based on my last conversations with Parallel. Gotcha.
Okay. And then the next one, 392 beds with the Verve by Verve Columbus by Subtext. Anything else with that one that you're hearing about?
No, we originally had 375, but 392 is right based on what we discussed. So I think that one's on its way too.
Gotcha. Now, this one's a little bit interesting. This is a local developer. Actually, it's Nate's previous principal at Edwards, but Avenue Partners. This is 8th on High. Todd, I'll ask you. I think you've got you've kind of been following this a little bit and know the developers well enough to know they're not furnishing it. They're not kind of positioning this as PBSH, but the location and given some of the other things that Avenue Partners has done in this similar location, we should fully expect that students are going to be leasing here, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a student housing market, but I think it also goes to what I just said. Those lines are blurred. We're seeing everything from down from south of the Capitol, all the way pushing through High Street to the north of campus and beyond, infilling with urban projects. And I think that there's so many amenities here at Ohio State. It's just a vibrant place that it's going to attract more than just the student occupants, and so this is an option for them.
Great. And then moving into 2024, we've got 450 beds coming from Landmark Properties. They're building the standard at Columbus. They'll offer studio 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5-bedroom floor plans. And then in 2025, this is probably the biggest project Columbus has ever seen. But 885 beds that the LV Collective out of Austin is doing. 222 West Lane is the address. They've got studio to 6-bedroom floor plans. So with these, we're talking about, over 2,000 beds in the next 3 years. And I just want to ask the panel really quick, does that make you nervous or do you welcome it?
I mean,
you also have to think about the number of beds. Harrison House is a large apartment complex on Lane that the LV Collective series is taking over. So there's 500 plus beds coming offline there, and I think that as we talked about, the student enrollment is going to continue to increase, and home team, we welcome it.
Ride that rent growth train. Someone's changing the high water mark.
But guys, Lance, you started to.
Yeah, I mean, I know we discussed this a little bit on our pre-call, but obviously, anytime there's a bunch of supply coming online, I think everyone gets a little nervous. But at the same time, I think based on what the plan is at Ohio State, with enrollment and things like that, I do think the university will grow over the next few years. And I think this year is a great projection into what's going to happen with student housing in the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Gotcha. Well, hey, I wanted to really quick before Kevin is joining us now, so I want to get over to that. But I did have one question from Teresa Zapata with Teresa. I'm blanking on the name. I know it starts with an R. RP. Thank you. She asks, are there low vacancies in conventional that also support the strong performance and occupancy, pre-lease and rental growth your groups track conventional in addition to other PBSH?
I will just jump on that really quick. It's their play into occupancy growth for us, because we can kind of be transitional in that way where if a student just graduate, I mean, there is a high rate of students that graduate from Ohio State and stay in Columbus just because of all the companies that are based there and how growing it is and how popular it is, especially for young professionals. And so I think for where we're situated, just north of that Grandview market, occupancy hits and conventional, directly play an opportunity for us because those recent grads gravitate towards that Grandview market. We literally sit just north of it on that edge of West Campus with a couple other properties.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we have about 2,000 conventional units, and all those same fact patterns continue, as they are on campus as well.
Gotcha. Well, guys, I want to get over to Kevin, and I think this is Kevin. I hope this is something that we can start doing with our other deep dives. But for our panel today, thanks so much for participating in this, giving us your insight of what's happening on the ground there in Columbus. I truly appreciate that. Charlie, you may want to stay on for a second, but if the other ones want to exit, we'll go ahead and get started with Kevin and talking about what's happening from a legislation standpoint in the state of Ohio, and talk a little bit about how that's affecting property tax. Kevin, I think most people on this webinar probably know you. They've seen you at conferences, but if you could tell a little bit about what you do with your principal at Ron, you're based in Texas, but from a national student housing standpoint, you are the guy that everybody goes to when we talk about tax reassessments and things like that. So if you could give a quick intro, and then let's jump into your bullet points for today.
Sure. Thanks, Wes. My name's Kevin McCune. For anybody that's I've not had the pleasure of meeting with at one of the conferences, and I'll do my best to keep this a little short and sweet, as property tax certainly gets people to draw the frowny face, and I certainly don't want Charlie to get too bored over there if he stays on camera. So, but yeah, with Ryan, we're the largest property tax consulting practice in the world. We are a full service tax firm, but the largest property tax practice. And I run our national student housing platform within our property tax division, which is representation wise is about 460,000 beds across the country. So we kind of help anyone and everyone all across the U.S. and Canada. Lots, obviously, of student housing going north of the border these days as well. So lots of things to kind of talk about on a national scale, but obviously we're here to focus in on Columbus, and specifically, what we're going to talk about is a change of legislation in the state of Ohio that's going to be a drastic change, across the state. So this is going to kind of apply to the entirety of the state of Ohio, and is not even going to be student specific per se, but just how property taxes in general are changing through the state because of a new legislation. So,
let me know if you want to move the slides, or if you need me to. Either way.
Sure. I'll move. Kind of start with just kind of for anybody that doesn't know, just the general historical process about how property tax system works in Ohio. So Ohio requires that each county do a full reassessment of their tax roll every 6 years. Every county is on a different baseline of that 6 years, and then within that 6 year, they have to do a quote unquote update every third year. So the way you're going to look at it realistically from the actual assessor's office, which is the auditor's office in Ohio, is there's a change of value that could occur every third year. Since we're talking about Columbus, we'll kind of focus a little bit about Franklin County, which has its next full reassessment coming in 2023. So we're about to walk into it. But realistically, the historical baseline is the auditors don't do too much, obviously, because they're only really doing full reassessments every 6 years. So realistically, a lot of your property tax impact and forecasting is really about an ongoing battle between the taxpayer and the local Board of Education. So in the state of Ohio, the school boards have their own appeal rights to valuations, just like the taxpayer. And most appeals that occur in Ohio have realistically been a battle between the Board of Education and the taxpayer, because the school boards are filing increased complaints on valuations that they believe are underassessed. So, your aggressive assessors, your aggressive school boards, which Columbus has certainly got plenty of, employ attorneys to do nothing but go look for possible increased complaint opportunities. So, typically a lot of this conversation comes around, as you acquire a deal, as a deal is built, if you're going to recap it, refi it, where there's new mortgages. Those are all things that kind of fall into the bucket of something they're going to see, which would initiate the school board to file one of those increased complaints. And so they have until March 31st of the year following the tax year to file that complaint. It's the same deadline as the taxpayer. And like I said, most appeals are done in that way, and historically would be initiated by the school board, which would open up a discussion between the taxpayer and the school board, where most of those appeals are settled by what is in essence called a side deal. And that's where there's a deal struck between the school board and the taxpayer to, more often than not, write the school board a check to get them to drop their appeal. So the value remains exactly the way it was, and you just write a check to the school board. The reason that gets done a lot of times is because there's two different levels of appeal there. And so the first level of appeal, would just be a normal hearing. So if anybody's taking your house really anywhere in the country to hearing, it's a lot like that, where you kind of present against typically the assessor's office, but this would be against the school board directly. And then either party could further appeal that to the next level. It's called the Board of Tax Appeals, where either side has discovery and subpoena power. So there's not too much in a hiding standpoint about what's going on of your financials or sales that might be entity level sales, mortgage stuff, just because if they push it that far and you just decide not to give them anything, they won't make a side deal, and they'll have the discovery power to get it down the road. So that's the background standpoint of what has been happening, or, historically. So this brings in the new legislation, which is House Bill 126. And this is extremely recent being passed. It was initiated last year, finally was passed by the Senate and the House earlier this year, and then signed by the governor earlier this summer. So very recent change, and just to kind of be the upfront and honest component of the outfall of this, we're still in the phase of nobody really knows what is going to happen through all of this, because there's several different parties, obviously, between taxpayers, the auditor's office that's going to set values, and the school boards, and how everybody's going to react to some of these changes, because it's just so early in the process. But a lot of the major consideration of what's being changed here is that the school boards will actually be more limited in what they're allowed to file complaints on. And so that, as you would think, might be a good thing for taxpayers, because now they can only challenge if there's an arm's length sale in the year before the lien date. So in essence, what we would be talking about right now is we're going into we're in calendar year 22, and we're about to be in tax year 22, which has an appeal deadline of next March 23. So the only thing the school board could now appeal is an arm's length sale that occurred during 2021. Okay. So it does give some break thought process, because historically they've been able to come in and file appeals regardless of when those transactions were. So if you had done a sale in 2020, or an entity level sale, you were always kind of on the hook of, will they find it at some point and file a complaint? So this does limit it down to, it had to be the year before. So it also comes to a standpoint, if you had a sale right now occurring during 2022, as we go through turn and a lot of that stuff starts to hit the market, they wouldn't be able to file that complaint until the tax year 23. So it does delay and kind of finite the process a little bit. Further, the sale price has to be more than 10% of the existing assessment, and it also has to be more than $500,000 so of an increase. So there's a little bit of games in a lot of the wording of the way this works and these allocation basis, particularly if you're doing entity level sales or portfolio level sales, about how you can get around some of these things, or at least because it's so new and it's not nuanced and there's not a definition component of arm's length transaction that goes with this. That's part of this statute. There's a lot of different argument plays that can go out with this. Then there's a lot of procedural changes about what has to happen. So because it now has to be proven as an arm's length transaction at the first year, they have to know a sale took place when they filed the appeal, because they can now, as I was talking about, there's two different levels of appeal. That first level, which is the Board of Revision, and then the second level at the BTA, the Board of Tax Appeals, where there's discovery power. The Board of Education is now not allowed to challenge a Board of Revision decision to the Board of Tax Appeals. So their subpoena power component of what would be allowed to them is now gone. So they're in essence going to have to be able to prove there's a sale, explicitly an arm's length sale of the property when they file. So it does kind of remove out a lot of the refinance components on what might just be brand new debt versus a transaction, as well as extenuates the opportunities of what has long historically been a lot of entity level transaction to try to hide sales altogether, where you only have to get through a certain period of time, and they'd have to prove the transaction takes place. So I would expect that at least in the short term, unless they start kind of closing some of these loopholes, we're going to have a whole lot of entity level transactions that are going to occur to try to circumvent property tax appeal components. And I think we're going to see a lot more pressure on non-disclosure agreements between all parties. Yes, brokers, lenders, that all means you guys, probably zero allowances of notating anything on LinkedIn, as those will all be things that will be looked at to try to prove transactions took place by these school boards. So
I don't know if we've got any brokers on, but that's an important thing for them, because they love talking about getting these deals done.
Yeah, no, it's everybody. I mean, the buyer, seller, broker, lender, lender's appraiser. I mean, it's anybody and everybody, particularly when we get to those year-end notations of everybody wants to say, it's like, here's what we've done in the space. And those are going to have to be really tied up, where they're not going to be allowed to make notes of these particular properties. Otherwise, they're going to cause problems for the buyers on the transactions. That if that's the way things are looked at. So that's going to certainly be an issue that's going to have to come through. As I mentioned, the quote unquote definition of arm's length transaction, I think, is going to probably come up and be an issue in some of these appeals going forward. Deals bought at a foreclosure, where a lot of times assessors would argue the other direction, that it's not arm's length. Portfolio level deals might maybe argue non-arm's length. Using portfolio sales to reallocate those purchase prices to get under a 10% increase threshold to begin with will also be a big component, because that'll prohibit any kind of appeal from them as well. So all in all, just to kind of sum through the standpoint of a lot of the ongoing basis is the auditors did not like this legislation. The boards of education and their attorneys don't like this legislation. And in fact, the council who represents most of the school boards in the Columbus area has actually already started a process to look to contend against the legislation. So there's all kinds of bits and pieces about how this might change. Like I said, there's certainly some of these thresholds about entity level transactions. I could certainly see that could be challenged or, amended like other states where if X% of a property transacts, that it would still, that it would open up a requirement to make a disclosure.
Is that challenged through a court process, Kevin, or how explain that process to me a little bit?
So on the disclosure basis, Ohio is a full disclosure state. So, you basically pay a transfer tax, and that's how, that the disclosures end up being made. But that's only on a deeded transaction and a true asset sale where it's going to sell from ABC LLC to XYZ LLC. And so you make that disclosure during that transfer tax versus an entity level transaction, it is basically done at a higher level. So the ownership entity LLC that owns the properties, ABC LLC, and that will remain the ownership entity. It'll remain, and somebody will come and buy the stock shares of ABC LLC to contain that ownership, and it removes that disclosure altogether. Gotcha. And so it's that entity level sale that kind of hides everything or attempts to hide everything. And that's been a common baseline of how things have been done in Ohio in the past. So like I said, there's still lots of different components that are going on with that. All the new rule components that begins with tax year 22. So it's going to be the first year with the deadline that comes in March of 23. There's time constraint components because the Board of Revision, which is that first level appeal, must make a decision on the complaint within the first year. Otherwise, their jurisdiction is lost. So it's also going to expedite this period of how things work, whereas a lot of times, a lot of these deals drag on for a couple of years before they're done. So it's going to be a little bit more expedited. And then one of the bigger components that I think is more taxpayer unfriendly and how things used to be done, where you could, once you did get stuck, you end up making these side deals with the school board. Side deals are now prohibited. So that's not going to be the way things work. It's going to make things much more equitable. But where you do get stuck and these sales are known and they do find them, it's going to be a little disadvantage as far as the way the system works now. The reason for that being is because you end up paying the school board money based on what the school board gets versus now to just change the values for everybody. And you'll pay the full taxing rate for all the taxing jurisdictions.
Gotcha.
So, the true takeaway, as I kind of mentioned from the beginning, is it's still in a position of no one really knows how everyone is going to react in all of this. How the auditors going to react is obviously with Franklin County's walking into a 2023 reassessment. The fact that school boards still have appeal rights, I think, will probably lean more towards the auditors not having much of a change of thought process in the way they normally would do things, and just continue relying on the school boards of having their position power and what they're allowed to do. But there will still be a lot of challenges on what is arm's length, and trying to make all of these different threshold components of the 10%, the 500,000. I think will be certainly things that are looked at as far as those entity level transactions continuing to occur, and then kind of working on different portfolio level deals where entity sales are not going to be feasible, whether it's, a brand new construction entity, something like that someone's just not going to buy. So that's kind of the big component of what's going on in taxes for Ohio.
Well, fantastic. And I know I appreciate all the folks that have been able to stay on. I know there were a lot of owners and folks that are looking to develop or currently have assets in Ohio. And sorry that this was put on the tail end and we went over late, but appreciate you for sticking around. If you've got any questions for Kevin, up here on the slide, we've got both his email as well as his direct line, and then also that QR code. If you snap that with your phone camera, that will actually take you to his LinkedIn page. So Kevin, I appreciate it. I'm assuming we'll see you at NMHC in Miami.
Hoping to be determined. I have a 3-week-old new one.
Congratulations!
So I've got to work the logistics of 3 kids now. So the travel component might be limited for me for another few months.
Gotcha. Well, Kevin, again, thanks. And to everybody else, again, we will not have a shop talk for for the month of August. We will have one on Thursday, September 15th. It is going to be a Thursday instead of Tuesday. The reason for that is on September 13th, BizNow is doing their annual Student Housing and University Development Conference in Philly, and I'll be there for that. So if you're there, please say hello. So we will be doing Shop Talk on that Thursday instead of Tuesday. So be looking out for that. Guys, thanks so much. If you have any questions for me, please email me at wes@studenthousinginsight.com. And certainly welcome to any suggestions or questions that you've got for future panels. Thanks so much, everyone.